In 1986, Porsche sold more than 30,000 cars in America alone. 7 years later, that number collapsed to 3,713. This wasn't a slow decline. This was a free fall. The 928 disappeared. The 968 disappeared. The air-cooled sound that had defined every 911 since 1963 was months from dying too. Analysts were writing the brand's obituary. Some were betting Porsche wouldn't survive the decade as an independent company. And the decision that saved it wasn't made in Stuttgart. It wasn't even made in Germany. In this video, we're going to tell the full story of how Porsche nearly vanished, the cars they had to kill to stay alive, and the humiliating bargain that turned the world's proudest car maker into its most profitable one. To understand how a legend almost went extinct, we have to go back to the year Porsche thought it had the world figured out. By 1986, Porsche wasn't competing. It was reigning. More than 50,000 cars a year were leaving Zuffenhausen, and America was the biggest customer. The 911 was a 23-year-old design, but it didn't matter. The 944 was outselling rivals in its class. The 928, a V8 Grand Tourer originally planned as the 911's replacement, was the yuppie status symbol of the decade, appearing in Risky Business, Scarface, and Weird Science. 4 models, 4 price points, waiting lists at every dealership. Inside the factory, things were more romantic than they looked from the showroom. Every Porsche was essentially built by hand. Workers walked the parts bins, hunting for the specific components each car needed. Each 911 took roughly 120 hours to assemble. 5 full working days of human labor per car. Enthusiasts love this story. Porsche engineers were proud of it. It sounds romantic now. It was suicide. Because while Porsche was hand-building a handful of expensive cars, Japan was building something else. The Nissan 300ZX twin-turbo arrived. The Acura NSX was being finalized, with Ayrton Senna consulting on the chassis. A loaded 928 GTS would crest 6 figures by 1995. A base 968 hit $55,000 against Japanese rivals starting $30,000 lower. But even as America fell in love with the 944 and the 928, the math at Zuffenhausen was starting to break. Between 1986 and 1993, Porsche's global orders dropped by 70%, not 17. 70. Global sales that had peaked above 50,000 cars a year crashed to roughly 14,000. In the United States, annual sales collapsed from over 30,000 down to 3,713. Over 3 years, Porsche accumulated losses of nearly 240 million Deutschmarks, the biggest financial loss in the company's history. And the cars themselves were the problem. The 928 GTS, the crown of the lineup, loaded past $100,000 in 1995, roughly 3 times the price of a Corvette. In its final year, Porsche sold just 77 928s in North America, 77 cars for an entire country. The 968 did not fare much better. Over 4 years of production, only 12,780 were built worldwide. Every problem was connected. The cars took too long to build, so they cost too much to sell. They cost too much to sell, so volume dropped. Some analysts openly believed Porsche survive as an independent company, and in the middle of this, the board did something no one expected. They fired the CEO. They promoted the 40-year-old head of production, a mechanical engineer named Wendelin Wiedeking. Der Spiegel said he looked like a clerk at a Venetian blinds manufacturer. He had no charisma, no industry stardom, and no illusions about what he was inheriting. But he had already decided he was willing to do the one thing Porsche's culture had refused to consider for 20 years. And the man who would end the crisis wasn't a Porsche engineer. He wasn't even German. Therefore, when Wiedeking took over in 1993, he did something no Stuttgart carmaker had ever done before. He hired the Japanese. Specifically, he hired Chihiro Nakao, a consultant from a firm called Shingijutsu Global Consulting, composed of former Toyota engineers. Nakao had spent 27 years inside Toyota, implementing the Toyota production system, the just-in-time method that had been steadily destroying Western automakers for a decade. Wiedeking flew Porsche's management team to Japan, toured the Toyota plants, then flew Nakao to Zuffenhausen. Nakao walked the Porsche assembly floor. He did not speak German. He did not speak the Swabian dialect the factory workers used. He walked the line anyway, looked at the parts bins, watched a 120-hour build process, and delivered the verdict that would define the next decade of Porsche history. A terrible plant. But there is hope. Wiedeking described what happened next in a 1996 New York Times interview. The hardest thing about the turnaround was not the engineering. It was watching Japanese consultants walk the floor of the proudest German sports car company in the world and tell Porsche engineers that everything they were doing was wrong. He said they were tough. He said they were aggressive with the workers. And then he said, "We wanted it that way." Management layers went from 6 to 4. Executive staff was cut by 38%. Parts bins were reorganized into just-in-time delivery. The production time for a single car dropped from 120 hours to 72. Defects per car were cut in half. For the first time in its history, Porsche was being built the way Toyota built Camrys. Then Wiedeking killed 2 of the 3 remaining models. The 928 and the 968 were both discontinued at the end of 1995. For the 1996 model year, Porsche sold exactly 1 car, the 911. The lineup had been amputated to save the patient. But the cost of survival wasn't just the 2 cars they killed. It was what they were about to do to the one they kept. The 993 generation of the 911, introduced in 1993, would be the last car Porsche ever built with an air-cooled engine. Since 1963, air cooling had been the soul of the 911, the engineering signature that separated Porsche from every other carmaker on Earth. By 1998, it was gone. The final 993 rolled off the line on March 31st, 1998, a Riviera Blue Carrera 4S shipped to comedian Jerry Seinfeld. Only 68,881 were ever built. The replacement was the 996, water-cooled, emissions-compliant, and most controversially, sharing parts with the new Boxster. The 2 cars had the same front end, the same headlights. Enthusiasts named the design the fried egg headlight, and the 996 became one of the most hated 911 generations ever made. But it was profitable. By 2000, North American Porsche sales had climbed from 3,713 back to 46,110. Porsche was saved. The company analysts had written off in 1992 would become the most profitable car maker in the world less than a decade later. And the decision the opening promised, the one made outside Stuttgart, was Nakao's. A Japanese Toyota disciple walking the floor of Zuffenhausen saved the most German carmaker on Earth by forcing it to build cars the Japanese way. So here is what the near death of Porsche actually tells us. Legends don't always die. Sometimes they get saved, and discover that's worse. Porsche traded the method for the badge. They kept the name and buried the way they made it matter. Every hand-built 928, every transaxle 944, every air-cooled 993 is now a museum piece, not because the cars got old, but because the company that built them that way no longer exists. This wasn't an accident. This was a choice. Wiedeking made it in 1993, and he said it plainly in 2006. Every product must earn money. Otherwise, you are simply pursuing a hobby. Porsche stopped being a hobby that year. It started being a business. What do you think? Was killing the 928 and 968 the right call? Or did Porsche lose its soul in 1993?